Mrs. Emily watched the full moon through the window of her home on Hope Ranch, her tired eyes reflecting the unease that had been disturbing her nights for months. The wind blew gently through the century-old trees surrounding the property, bringing with it the familiar aroma of damp earth and wildflowers. It was another night when sleep stubbornly refused to come, for she knew that soon it would happen again. Star, her white mare, would mysteriously disappear from the stable. The rancher rose from her rocking chair and walked to the kitchen, preparing another cup of chamomile tea that no longer had any effect. Her footsteps echoed through the silent house, mingling with the night sounds of the ranch. Through the window, she could see the stable where Star was resting, or at least should have been resting. Tom Johnson, her oldest employee and a person of complete trust, had reinforced the gate latches that very afternoon. "This time it'll work, Mrs. Emily," he guaranteed, showing off the meticulous work he had done. But deep in her heart, Emily knew that no latch would be enough to prevent what was happening. It was past midnight when she decided to make one more check before trying to sleep. She put on her worn jacket, slipped on her rubber boots, and went out into the cold night. The path to the stable was illuminated only by the silver light of the moon, which seemed brighter than ever. As she approached, she noticed something was different. The silence was deeper, denser. Her steps hesitated for a moment before opening the stable door. As she suspected, Star wasn't there. The gate, even with all the new latches, was ajar, as if it had been manipulated with impossible precision for an ordinary animal. Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. It wasn't the first time this had happened, but something about this particular night made her concern increase. In recent months, her white mare had developed this inexplicable behavior. Every night, without fail, she disappeared from the stable, and only returned at dawn, exhausted and covered in dust, as if she had traveled miles. At first, she thought it was just instinctive behavior, perhaps searching for food or water. But she soon realized there was something deeper, more mysterious about these nightly escapes. Star showed no signs of fear or stress during the day. On the contrary, she maintained an almost supernatural serenity, as if guarding a precious secret. The rancher began to mentally review all the changes she had implemented to try to understand her mare's behavior. She increased the amount of hay, changed the water more frequently, checked if there was any predator prowling the area. Nothing seemed to justify those nightly escapades. The other animals on the ranch remained calm, as if this situation was perfectly normal. The dogs, always alert to any suspicious movement, didn't even bark when Star left. It was as if they were all part of a silent conspiracy, guarding a secret that Emily couldn't decipher. On this particular night, something inside her said she needed to discover the truth. She could no longer continue living with that uncertainty, with that feeling that something important was happening right under her nose. She decided that the following night, she would do something she should have done a long time ago. She would follow Star on her mysterious nightly journey. She returned to the house with heavy steps, her mind buzzing with possibilities. As she prepared for bed, she began to formulate a plan. She would need to be careful, as Star was an extremely intelligent and perceptive animal. Any false move could alert her and cause her to change her mysterious routine. The rest of the night was populated by restless dreams, blurred images of her white mare riding under the moonlight, crossing unknown fields towards a destination she couldn't reach. When she finally fell asleep, the moon was already giving way to the first rays of sun, and as always happened, Star returned to the stable, her hooves silent on the damp morning earth, her white coat covered with the dust of a journey that, for now, remained a mystery. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Tell us which city you're watching us from. We'll continue. The following afternoon dragged on with agonizing slowness for Mrs. Emily. Every minute seemed to last an eternity as she prepared for the night vigil. During the day, she maintained her normal routine so as not to raise suspicions, but her heart was beating fast with anticipation of what she might discover. Tom Johnson noticed her restlessness during lunch. "You don't seem well today, Mrs. Emily," he commented, helping himself to some more beans. She tried to disguise it, but their years of living together made it difficult to hide anything from him. "It's just tiredness, Tom. These sleepless nights. You know." The employee nodded, understanding, but his gaze showed that he understood more than he let on. He too was intrigued by Star's behavior, though he kept his theories to himself. Years of work on the ranch had taught him that some mysteries are better left unexplained. As the sun began to set, Emily began her preparations. She dressed in dark clothes to better camouflage herself in the night, put on her quietest boots, and prepared a small bag with water and some cookies. She didn't know how long she would need to wait, but she was determined to find out where her mare went every night. Shortly after 11 o'clock, she silently left the house. The full moon still reigned in the sky, illuminating the path to the place she had chosen for her vigil, a small abandoned shed near the stable, from where she had a perfect view of the gate without being noticed. Time passed slowly as she waited, each night sound making her heart leap. The crickets sang their nocturnal serenade, and an owl hooted in the distance, as if it were part of a natural orchestra that served as the soundtrack for that moment of waiting. Finally, close to midnight, the movement she had been waiting for began. Star rose in her stable, her movements deliberate and precise. With surprising delicacy for an animal of her size, she approached the gate and, using her teeth, began to manipulate the latches that Tom had installed. Emily had to contain an exclamation of surprise as she saw the skill with which her mare managed to open the fasteners. It was no wonder that no type of latch had worked until then. Star wasn't simply forcing her way out. She had learned to open each type of lock they put in her path. As soon as she was free, the animal began to walk towards the road that led to town. Her steps were sure, as if following an already well-known path. Emily waited for her to move away a bit before starting to follow her, maintaining a safe distance so as not to be noticed. The night was extraordinarily clear, and Emily could perfectly distinguish Star's white silhouette against the starry sky. The mare maintained a steady rhythm, her hooves beating softly against the earth of the road. There was no rush in her movements, but there was also no hesitation. As they approached the town, Emily felt her curiosity increase. Why would an animal that had all the comfort and safety of the ranch risk coming here every night? What could be so important as to justify this repeated journey? The first houses of the town began to appear, their dark windows like sleeping eyes. Star continued, on her way now with even more careful steps so as not to make noise on the paved streets. Emily followed her like a shadow, her heart beating faster as they entered the historic center of Millbrook. It was then that something unexpected happened. Instead of continuing down the main street, Star turned abruptly toward St. Anthony's Church. The majestic colonial temple rose against the night sky, its imposing towers seeming to touch the stars. Emily hid behind one of the columns in the square, watching in disbelief as her mare approached the large wooden doors of the church. What happened next made her need to lean on the column to keep from falling. With a smooth movement, Star pushed one of the doors, which opened with a low creak. The interior of St. Anthony's Church was plunged into a mystical twilight, broken only by the beams of moonlight crossing the colored stained glass windows. Mrs. Emily remained motionless for a few moments, her eyes adapting to the darkness as she tried to process what she had just witnessed. Her mare, Star, had just entered the sacred temple as if it were the most natural thing in the world. With hesitant steps and a leaping heart, the rancher crossed the church courtyard. The sound of her footsteps echoed softly against the ancient walls, mingling with the solemn silence of the place. As she reached the half-open door, she took a deep breath before entering, feeling the weight of centuries of history and faith on her shoulders. The aroma of old wood and candles mingled in the air, creating a unique atmosphere that only colonial churches possessed. Among the shadows of the dark wooden benches, Emily could distinguish Star's white silhouette, which had headed for one of the corners farthest from the altar. The mare seemed perfectly at ease in that sacred environment, as if she were part of it. It was then that an unexpected sound broke the silence, a small sigh almost inaudible but definitely human. Emily felt her entire body freeze. She wasn't alone there, and whatever was happening was much more complex than she had imagined. Moving with extreme caution, She approached the place where Star had stopped. What she saw made her heart tighten in a way she had never felt before. There, huddled between the church benches, slept a boy. He couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old. His dark hair was disheveled, and his clothes, though clean, showed signs of excessive use. Star was lying next to him, her body providing warmth and protection to the small sleeping being. The scene was of inexplicable tenderness, as if that nocturnal encounter were a sacred ritual between two lost souls that had found each other. The boy stirred in his sleep, murmuring incomprehensible words, and Emily took a step back, fearing to wake him. Her mind was buzzing with questions. Who was this child? Why was he sleeping in the church? And how had Star found him? The answer to the last question began to form in her mind as she observed the protective way in which her mare positioned herself next to the boy. All that mystery, the nightly escapes, the inexplicable behavior, it all made sense now. Star wasn't just running away. She was taking care of this helpless child. A stronger gust of wind made the church doors creak, and the boy stirred again, this time opening his eyes. For a moment his gaze met Emily's, and she could see fear and distrust take over his childish features. Before she could say anything, he jumped up and hid behind Star, who remained impassive as if already expecting that reaction. "You don't need to be afraid," Emily spoke softly, keeping her distance so as not to frighten him even more. "I'm Star's owner. She's been coming to visit you every night, hasn't she?" The boy didn't answer, but his large, frightened eyes remained fixed on her, assessing whether he could trust this stranger who had discovered his hiding place. Star turned her head towards the boy and touched him gently with her muzzle, in a gesture that seemed to say that everything was all right. "My name is Emily," she continued, her voice maintaining a soft and welcoming tone. "You must be hungry. I have some cookies here with me if you want." Slowly she took the small package of cookies she had brought from her bag. The boy hesitated for a moment, but the rumble of his stomach spoke louder than his fear. Cautiously he approached and took one of the offered cookies. "Thank you," he murmured so softly that Emily could barely hear. It was the first word he had addressed to her, and it sounded like a small victory. "What's your name?" Emily asked, sitting on one of the nearby benches, maintaining a respectful distance. The silence stretched for a few moments before he answered, "Michael." His voice was small and hoarse, as if not much used. "Michael?" Emily repeated with a gentle smile. "It's a beautiful name. Do you want to tell me why you're sleeping here in the church?" The boy lowered his eyes, his hands nervously squeezing the rest of the cookie. Star approached him again, resting her muzzle on his shoulder in a gesture of silent support. It was evident that there was a painful story behind this scenario, and Emily knew she would need a lot of patience to uncover it. The days that followed the encounter in the church were marked by a delicate dance of approach between Mrs. Emily and Michael. The boy continued sleeping in the temple, but now Emily left clean blankets and a basket with food every night, always taking care not to invade his space or force an approach that he wasn't ready to accept. Star continued her nightly visits, but now Emily understood their purpose. The mare had become a bridge between two worlds, the comfort and safety of Hope Ranch and the lonely refuge that Michael had found in the church. It was as if the animal had developed a maternal instinct for the boy, protecting him from cold, nights, and loneliness. On a particularly pleasant afternoon, while Emily was at the town market buying supplies, she found Tom Johnson talking with some local residents. The employee, who always had an attentive ear for the region's stories, had discovered more information about Michael's past. "The boy is Mr. Anderson's grandson, the one who used to take care of the square gardens," Tom told in a low voice, while helping Emily with the shopping. "They say the grandfather used to take him to see the animals on the ranch when he was younger. He had a special affection for Star." That information made several pieces of the puzzle start to fit in Emily's mind. Now she understood why Star seemed to have such a special connection with the boy. They had known each other for years. They had a history together. "And his parents?" Emily asked, though she feared the answer. Tom shook his head negatively. "Nobody knows for sure. After Mr. Anderson passed away, the boy stayed with Aunt Martha, the grandfather's sister." but people comment that she never had much of a way with children. That same night, when Emily went to take the basket of supplies to the church, she found Michael awake, sitting on the steps of the altar with Star by his side. For the first time, it was he who initiated the conversation. "Did you know my grandfather?" he asked timidly, his fingers playing with Star's white mane. Emily sat down beside him, maintaining a comfortable distance. "Yes, I knew him. Mr. Anderson was a very special man. The square gardens were never as beautiful after he left." Michael nodded, a small smile appearing on his lips. "He used to bring me here every Sunday after Mass. Then we'd go see Star at the ranch. Grandpa said she was magical, that she could understand when people were sad." "And he was right," Emily replied softly. "Star always knew when someone needed her. That's how she found you, wasn't it?" The boy was silent for a moment, his hands still caressing the mare's soft coat. "After Grandpa left, I went to live with Aunt Martha," he began, his voice trembling. "Slightly. But she doesn't like children very much. She says she only accepted me because of the money the government sends." Emily's heart tightened as she heard those words. How could anyone treat a child that way? Michael continued his story, the words coming out little by little, like water from a long-dammed spring. "One day, after a bad fight, I ran away from home. I didn't know where to go, so I came to the church. The priest doesn't stay here at night, and I felt safe near God like Grandpa taught me. That's when Star appeared, as if she knew I was here." Emily observed the bond between the boy and the animal, the way they understood each other without words. It was something beyond human comprehension, a connection that transcended common logic. "Michael," she called softly, "you can't keep living like this, sleeping in the church. It's not safe nor healthy for a child." Fear returned to the boy's eyes. "I don't want to go back to Aunt Martha's house," he exclaimed, his voice choked with panic. "What if—" Emily hesitated for a moment, but something in her heart impelled her to continue. "What if you came to live on the ranch? We have a lot of space, and Star would be happy to have you. Around all the time." Michael's face lit up for an instant, but soon the shadow of doubt returned. "Aunt Martha won't let me. She says she needs me there because of the money she receives." Emily felt a determination grow in her chest. She knew it wouldn't be easy, that there would be legal and bureaucratic obstacles to overcome. But she also knew she couldn't abandon this boy to his own fate. He had already suffered too many losses in his short life. The news that a boy was sleeping in St. Anthony's Church didn't take long to spread through the small town of Millbrook. In a community where everyone knew each other, secrets rarely remained hidden for long. It was on a Thursday morning that Aunt Martha showed up at Hope Ranch, her high heels hitting hard against the dirt road, her closed expression denouncing her barely contained fury. Mrs. Emily was in the yard feeding the chickens when she saw her approach. Tom Johnson, who was pruning the rose bushes near the gate, immediately sensed the tension in the air and approached, strategically keeping nearby. "Where's Michael?" Martha's voice cut through the air like a razor. "I know you have something to do with all this nonsense, Emily." The rancher remained calm, although her heart was beating fast. "Good morning, Martha. I think we need to talk calmly about this situation." "Calmly?" Martha laughed humorlessly. "That boy is my legal responsibility. You have no right to meddle in this. He needs to come home immediately." In the nearby stable, Star neighed as if sensing the tension of the moment. Tom Johnson took a step forward, his silent presence serving as a reminder that Emily wasn't alone in this situation. "Michael is scared, Martha," Emily began, carefully choosing her words. "He told me about the reason he ran away. A child doesn't leave their home without reason." Martha's face paled for an instant, but she quickly regained her composure. "What has that brat been making up? I give him a roof, food, clean clothes. He should be grateful." It was at that moment that Michael appeared at the door of the house, attracted by the raised voices. Upon seeing his aunt, he instinctively retreated, trying to hide behind Emily. The fear in his eyes was so palpable that even Tom Johnson, normally a reserved man, couldn't contain an expression of concern. "Come here right now, Michael," Martha ordered, taking a step towards the boy. Star, who had been watching everything from her stable, bolted out and positioned herself between Martha and the boy, her eyes fixed on the woman in a clearly protective posture. The animal, normally docile, emitted an aura of strength that made Martha involuntarily back away. "This is ridiculous," she exclaimed, trying to mask her discomfort. "Now I have to deal with a crazy horse too?" "Mare," Tom Johnson corrected, speaking for the first time. "And she's not crazy, just protective. Animals have a sixth sense for certain things. You—" "No?" The look Martha shot at the employee could have frozen hell. "I don't care. I'm going to the authorities. This is kidnapping, and you'll regret meddling where you weren't called." Before anyone could respond, she spun on her heels and left, leaving behind a cloud of dust and tension. Michael, still trembling, clung to Emily's skirt. "Don't let her take me, please," he begged, with tears in his eyes. Emily knelt down to be at the boy's height, holding his small hands in hers. "Nobody's going to take you away from here against your will, Michael. I promise." Tom Johnson cleared his throat, drawing Emily's attention. "Mrs. Emily, we need to act fast. Martha has legal custody of the boy. If she goes to the authorities—" "I know, Tom," Emily replied, her mind already working on possible solutions. "I need to go to town today. I'm going to see Mr. Graham, that lawyer who helped us with the ranch documentation. He'll know what to do." Star approached Michael, gently touching his shoulder with her muzzle. The boy hugged the animal's neck, finding comfort in her constant presence. It was a heartbreaking scene, a child who found more affection in an animal than in his own family. "Tom, can you keep an eye on Michael while I go to town?" Emily asked, already preparing to leave. "You can count on it, Mrs. Emily. Nobody gets near the boy without going through me and Star first." As she got ready to go to town, Emily felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. She knew she was about to enter a difficult battle. Martha wouldn't give up easily, especially if there was money involved. But seeing Michael playing in the yard with Star, his laughter echoing for the first time since he arrived at the ranch, Emily knew she would do anything to protect that child. Mr. Graham's office was in a colonial building in the historic center of Millbrook. The lawyer, a grey-haired gentleman with perceptive eyes, listened attentively as Emily recounted the entire situation. The ancient walls of the room seemed to absorb every word of the story, while the old fan in the corner spun lazily, spreading the heavy afternoon air. "The situation is delicate, Mrs. Emily," he commented, adjusting his reading glasses. "Martha has legal custody of the boy, and the fact that he's on your ranch without authorization could indeed be interpreted as problematic." "But she only wants Michael because of the pension money," Emily protested, her hands gripping her purse tightly. "The boy is clearly being neglected. Doesn't that count for anything?" Mr. Graham stood up and walked to the window, observing the movement in the square outside. "Yes, it does, but we need concrete evidence of this neglect. Suspicions and words of a frightened child are not always enough in a court of law." It was at this moment that Tom Johnson, who had arrived a few minutes after Emily, cleared his throat to get attention. "Sir, I think I can help with that. I've been talking to some people in town and I've discovered some interesting things about Mrs. Martha." The employee then began to report his findings. Through conversations with local merchants, he had discovered that Martha was drowning in debt. Several bounced checks, overdue promissory notes, and a series of creditors who no longer believed in her promises of payment. "And there's more," Tom continued, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "Michael's pension money, which should be used for his well-being, has been used to pay off these debts. The stationery store owner told me that the boy went to school without supplies, using old notebooks and half-used pencils." Mr. Graham listened attentively, making notes on his pad. "This is a start," he said, "but we still need more. Can you gather witnesses willing to confirm this information?" The priest at St. Anthony's Church, Emily suddenly remembered. He must have noticed that Michael was sleeping there. And Martha's neighbors, someone must have heard or seen something. The lawyer nodded, his expression softening a bit. "I'll need a few days to prepare the necessary documentation. In the meantime, Mrs. Emily, I suggest you keep Michael on the ranch. If Martha shows up with the police, say that the boy is under your temporary protection due to suspicions of mistreatment, and that there's already a legal process underway. And if they try to take him by force? The concern was evident in Emily's voice. They won't, Tom Johnson stated with conviction. The whole town is already talking about how the boy has flourished in these few days on the ranch. Even Sheriff Sanders, who always has coffee at Mrs. Cindy's bakery, commented that it was the first time he'd seen the kid smiling since his grandfather passed away. As they returned to the ranch, Emily felt a mix of hope and apprehension. The afternoon, sky was beginning to take on orange hues, and she thought about how life could change so quickly. A few weeks ago, her biggest concern was understanding why Star escaped every night. Now she was about to enter a legal battle for custody of a child. When they arrived at Hope Ranch, they found Michael in the orchard, picking oranges with Star's help, who patiently waited while he placed the fruits in a basket supported on her back. The scene was so natural, so full of innocence and joy, that for a moment Emily forgot all her worries. "Mrs. Emily," Michael shouted when he saw her running in her direction with a wide smile. "Star helped me pick oranges to make juice, and Tom taught me how to tell when they're ripe by the smell." Emily hugged him, feeling her heart fill with love for this little being that fate had placed in her path. "That's wonderful, Michael. Let's make a really tasty juice for dinner then." That night, as she watched Michael sleeping peacefully in his new room, Emily made a silent promise. No matter what she had to face, she would fight with all her strength to give that child the loving home he deserved. And she was sure she wasn't alone in this battle. She had Tom Johnson, Mr. Graham, and of course Star, her faithful mare, who had been Michael's guardian angel from the beginning. 3 weeks passed. Since the visit to Mr. Graham's office, life at Hope Ranch had found a new rhythm, with Michael adapting more each day to the routine of the countryside. Mornings were filled with lessons that Emily improvised on the porch, determined not to let the boy miss the school year, while afternoons were dedicated to ranch activities, always with Star nearby. The mare, who previously had to escape to see Michael, now enjoyed the constant presence of the boy. The two were inseparable, and Star seemed to have officially assumed the role of the child's guardian. It was common to see her following Michael through the orchard, helping him pick fruit, or simply resting under the shade of trees while he read stories aloud to her. On this particular morning, however, the peaceful atmosphere was broken by the arrival of an official letter. Tom Johnson brought it as soon as he returned from town, his normally serene face marked with concern. "It's from the court, Mrs. Emily," he said, handing over the envelope. "Mr. Graham called the general store, asking for you to go to his office as soon as possible." Emily felt her heart tighten as she opened the envelope. The words danced before her eyes, but one phrase in particular stood out like thunder on a clear day. "We determine the immediate return of the minor to his legal guardian, Mrs. Martha Wilson, until the investigation of the presented complaints is concluded." "Tom," she called, her voice trembling slightly, "I need you to stay with Michael while I go to town. Don't let him realize something's wrong." The employee nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "You can count on me, Mrs. Emily. I'll take him to see the chicks that hatched early this morning. He'll love that." At Mr. Graham's office, the air was heavy with the tension of the news. The lawyer was leafing through a pile of documents, his face contorted in an expression of frustration. "Martha was smarter than we imagined," he explained. "She managed to convince the judge that she's being victimized, presented proof of recent debt payments, and even a medical report stating that she suffers from anxiety due to the traumatic situation of having her nephew taken away from her." "But that's ridiculous," Emily protested. "And all the evidence we gathered, the testimonies from the neighbors, from the priest." "The judge wants to hear all parties involved," Mr. Graham explained. "But until then, legal custody prevails. Michael needs to return to Martha's house within 48 hours, or you could be charged with contempt of court." Emily felt the world spin around her. How could she explain this to Michael? How could she send him back to that house where there was no love, only financial interest? "Sir," she said, after a moment of silence, what if I tried for adoption?" The lawyer adjusted his glasses, thoughtful. "It's a possibility we can explore, but it would be a long process. We would need to prove that Martha is unfit to care for the boy, and she will certainly fight against it. It doesn't matter how long it takes, Emily stated with determination. I'll fight for him until the end. Upon returning to the ranch, Emily found Michael playing in the yard surrounded by chicks, while Star stood guard nearby. The scene, which would normally warm her heart, now made her feel a deep pain. "Aunt Emily," Michael shouted excitedly when he saw her. "Look at how many chicks were born. Tom said I can choose one to be mine." She approached, forcing a smile. "Is that so, sweetheart? How wonderful." It was then that Michael noticed something different in her expression. It was impressive how sensitive children could be to changes in adults' moods. "Did something happen?" he asked, his voice losing its enthusiasm. Emily knelt in front of him, taking his small hands in hers. How to explain to a child that sometimes the adult world could be so unfair? How to say that despite all the love and care they had built here, an official paper had the power to separate them? "Michael," she began, struggling to keep her voice steady, "we need to talk about something important." Before she could continue, Star approached, placing herself beside the boy, as she always did when she sensed he needed protection. It was as if the animal perfectly understood what was about to happen. The sun was beginning to set when Emily finished explaining the situation to Michael. The boy remained silent for long moments, his hands still intertwined with hers, while silent tears rolled down his face. "But I don't want to go back," he finally whispered, his voice choked. "Why can't I stay here with you, with Star and Tom?" Emily pulled him into a tight hug, feeling his small body tremble. "It's just for a while, darling. I promise I'll do everything I can to bring you back. But for now, we need to obey the judge." Tom Johnson, who was observing the scene from afar, discreetly wiped away a tear that insisted on falling. In all the years he had worked on the ranch, he had never seen Mrs. Emily so shaken. "Can I take Star with me?" Michael asked, a last thread of hope in his voice. "Star needs to stay on the ranch, Michael," Emily explained gently, "but I'm sure she'll continue to look after you, even from afar." As if understanding the conversation, the mare approached and rested her muzzle on the boy's face in a gesture of affection that brought more tears to his eyes. The next morning, Mr. Graham arrived at the ranch, accompanied by a social worker and, to everyone's dismay, Aunt Martha. The woman displayed a triumphant smile that made Emily's stomach churn. "Come on, Michael," Martha called with forced sweetness. "Time to go home." The boy clung to Emily's waist, refusing to move. The social worker, a middle-aged lady named Mrs. Carmen, approached gently. "Michael, dear," she spoke in a soft voice, "I know it's being difficult, but we need to follow what the judge determined. I promise I'll visit you regularly to see if everything's all right." Emily knelt down again at the boy's height. "Remember what we talked about. You need to be strong now, and I'll visit you whenever I can, okay?" Michael nodded weakly, wiping his tears with the back of his hands. Tom Johnson approached with a small backpack, where they had packed some of the boy's belongings, new clothes that Emily had bought, some books, and a drawing he had made of Star. As they began to walk towards the car, a loud neigh cut through the air. Star, who was in the pasture, jumped the fence with surprising agility and galloped towards them, stopping between Michael and the vehicle. "Get that animal out of here," Martha demanded, backing away frightened. "Star," Emily called firmly, although her heart perfectly understood the animal's reaction. "Let Michael go. He'll be fine." The mare remained motionless for a few moments, her intelligent eyes fixed on Martha, as if assessing her intentions. Finally, she lowered her head and allowed Michael to hug her one last time. "I'll miss you," the boy whispered in the animal's ear. As the car drove away down the dirt road, Emily, Tom, and Star remained, standing watching until the vehicle disappeared around a bend. The silence that followed was heavy, laden with sadness and concern. "Mrs. Emily," Tom finally spoke, "what are we going to do now?" "We're going to fight, Tom," she answered, her voice finding a new determination. "We're going to do whatever it takes to bring Michael back." That night, for the first time since all that mystery had begun, Star didn't try to escape from the stable. She remained quiet in her corner, her eyes turned towards the town, as if keeping watch from afar over the boy who had become so special to all of them. Emily couldn't sleep. She spent hours on the porch, watching the stars and mentally reviewing every detail of what she would need to do. Mr. Graham had promised to start the process of investigating Martha's finances first thing Monday. The social worker would make regular visits. They were small rays of hope to which she clung with all her might. "I won't give up on you, Michael," she murmured into the night. "Even if I have to move heaven and earth, I'll bring you back home." If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Tell us which city you're watching us from. We'll continue. A week had passed since Michael returned to Aunt Martha's house. For Emily, each day felt like an eternity. The promised visits were always postponed with different excuses. Michael was sleeping, had gone to the doctor, was doing homework. The rancher felt that something wasn't right. On a particularly hot afternoon, Tom Johnson arrived hurriedly at the ranch, his face red from running. "Mrs. Emily," he called breathlessly, "you need to come with me right now. I've discovered something important." Without wasting time on explanations, Tom took her to town. They stopped in front of a small construction materials store, where an elderly man was anxiously waiting for them. "Mr. Joe here is the mailman's cousin," Tom explained. "Tell Mrs. Emily what you told me." The man, nervous, looked around before starting to speak. "Mrs. Martha has been coming here every week to cash checks. Always the same amounts, always from the same account. But yesterday," he made a dramatic pause, "yesterday she dropped an envelope while taking out her wallet. It was a bank statement." Emily held her breath, beginning to understand where this story was going. "And what was in that statement, Mr. Joe?" "It was the account where Michael's pension is deposited," he answered, lowering his voice even more. "But the money isn't being used for the boy. There are several deposits being made to a gambling house in Springfield. Every month, on the day the pension is deposited, the money is transferred there." The revelation hit Emily like lightning. It wasn't just neglect. It was deliberate misuse of money that should be used for Michael's well-being. Tom Johnson already had his cell phone in hand, calling Mr. Graham. The lawyer wasted no time. In less than an hour, he was meeting with them in his office, examining the copies of the checks that Mr. Joe had kept and the found bank statement. "This is exactly what we needed," Mr. Graham spoke, his eyes shining. "I'm going to prepare an urgent petition for the judge. With this evidence, we can get a search and seizure order for Martha's bank documents." As they discussed the next steps, Mrs. Carmen, the social worker, rushed into the office. Her normally serene face was marked with concern. "I'm glad I found you," she said, sitting heavily in a chair. "I made a surprise visit to Mrs. Martha's house today. Michael isn't there." "What do you mean he's not there?" Emily asked, feeling her heart race. "According to the neighbors, he hasn't been sleeping at home. They say Martha locks him out when she goes out to gamble at night. The boy has been sleeping on the park bench." The news fell like a bomb in the room. Mr. Graham immediately began drafting a document, his hands flying over the computer keyboard. "This changes everything," he said, without taking his eyes off the screen. "I'm going to request an emergency protection measure. With the social worker's testimony and this financial evidence, the judge can't ignore it." Emily barely heard the legal discussions that followed. Her mind was focused on Michael, alone in the park, after having known the comfort and affection of a true home. How must he be feeling? Was he scared? Hungry? It was then that a thought struck her. "The church!" she exclaimed, suddenly standing up. "He must have gone back to the church." Without waiting for a response, Emily ran out of the office, followed by Tom Johnson. The sun was already setting when they arrived at St. Anthony's Church. The doors were closed, but Tom knew of a small side access that the priest used to leave unlocked for faithful who wanted to pray outside of Mass hours. As they entered, the silence of the temple was broken by a familiar sound, the soft neighing of a horse. There, between the church benches, they found not only Michael but also Star, who had somehow managed to get there. The boy was sleeping curled up against the animal's body, exactly as the first time Emily had found them. Star raised her head upon seeing them, her intelligent eyes seeming to say, "I found him again. I will always find him. The weeks that followed were intense. The judge, faced with the new evidence and the compelling report from the social worker, had no choice but to reverse his previous decision. Michael was temporarily placed under Emily's guardianship while the case against Martha proceeded. The aunt, confronted with evidence of her financial misconduct and neglect, ended up confessing everything. The gambling addiction had consumed not only Michael's pension money, but also her savings and her ability to be an adequate guardian for her nephew. On a sunny September morning, Emily, Michael, and Tom Johnson were again at the town courthouse. This time, however, the atmosphere was one of celebration. The judge had finally granted permanent custody of the boy to Emily, recognizing not only her ability to provide a loving home, but also the special bond that already existed between them. Michael, the judge addressed the boy with a gentle smile. Are you happy living with Mrs. Emily at Hope Ranch? The boy, who now looked taller and healthier, flashed a radiant smile. Very happy, Your Honor. There I have a real family. Aunt Emily helps me with my lessons. Uncle Tom teaches me about plants and animals, and Star— He paused, his eyes shining. Star is my guardian angel. The declaration drew emotional smiles from everyone present. Mr. Graham, who had fought tirelessly for the case, adjusted his glasses to hide the tears that threatened to fall. As they left the courthouse, they were greeted by a small crowd. Town residents who had followed the story, ranch neighbors, and even the priest from St. Anthony's Church all wanted to celebrate this moment of justice and love. But the biggest surprise awaited them in the square in front of the courthouse. There, defying all the town's norms and customs, was Star. The animal had escaped once again from the stable, as if knowing that this was a special day. This time, however, no one minded her irregular presence in the historic center. Michael ran to hug her, and the animal lowered her head affectionately as she always did. It was a scene that perfectly summed up the entire journey they had traveled. A boy who found love and protection in the most unexpected places, a mare who became guardian and guide, and a woman who opened her heart to a mission greater than herself. That night, back at Hope Ranch, Emily watched from the porch as Michael played in the yard. Tom Johnson was by her side, a glass of lemonade in hand and a satisfied smile on his face. You know, Mrs. Emily, he commented thoughtfully, sometimes God does right straight with crooked lines. Who would have thought that all that story of Star escaping every night would end up like this? Emily smiled, observing how Star patiently followed Michael around the yard like a watchful mother. It's true, Tom. I think she always knew what she was doing. Maybe she understood before all of us that Michael needed a home. Michael came running to the porch, his cheeks flushed from playing. Aunt Emily, Mom, he corrected shyly, making Emily's heart melt. Can I sleep with the window open tonight? I want to see the stars before I go to sleep. Of course you can, my love, she replied, pulling him into a tight hug. And tomorrow, we'll start decorating your room the way you want. How about that? The boy nodded excitedly before returning to his games. Star followed him as she always did, her presence constant and protective. The full moon was beginning to rise on the horizon, the same moon that had witnessed the beginning of this extraordinary story. But now, instead of mystery and concern, it illuminated a scene of pure happiness, a family formed by the bonds of love, proving that sometimes the greatest miracles happen in the most unexpected ways. And Star, well, she never needed to escape during the night again. Her work as a guardian angel had been fulfilled. She had guided Michael to his true home. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Michael, Star, and Mrs. Emily has touched your hearts. For more moving stories like this one, we've prepared a special playlist that you can find by clicking on the link to the left. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like the video. This way you won't miss any of our special narratives that celebrate love, hope, and the bonds that make us truly human. Share your thoughts in the comments and tell us what was the moment that moved you the most in this journey. Until the next story.